What are ways to fight against the New Age seeping into the church, making its inroads into the church? Pretty much the way to fight against any ideology making its way into the church is to be grounded in the truth. That whenever someone comes up and says something that just, is not biblical, that alarm bells are going to go off for you and go, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. Even if this is one of the things why the way that I teach, the way that I preach on Sunday mornings, the kinds of lessons and things that we do on Wednesday nights, is to establish that foundation so you're getting exposed to the information. The reason we do stuff like this, so that whenever someone says something, right, that even if in the moment you're not like, oh, that is wrong because there's this and that, and you're running through all the facts, you at least know, wait a minute, that's not right. Right? I'm grounded in the truth, and there's something wrong going on there, and then at least you can go look closer. But I think a big part of the reason why a lot of this stuff seeps in is because people have, no other way to really put it, but shallow faith, shallow knowledge about doctrine and about what the Bible teaches, and something comes along that sounds good, because a lot of times these things are couched in very spiritual language. New Age especially is a problem because the spirituality and the language is involved. A lot of times, and you're talking about Mormonism, same language, different dictionary. Same thing goes on with New Age. There's a lot of the same words that they'll talk about with spirituality and salvation and redemption and things, but they mean totally different things. You're reading from different dictionaries. And so really the only way that we can, two things that I think we fail at spectacularly in the modern church is, one, to be well grounded in biblical truth, and two, is to be in each other's business. That's something we fail at. So that whenever you're starting to kind of get, that's starting to get its hooks in you, that I should actually have the freedom to go, what are you doing? That's not true, right? And just get in your business. We should be able to get in each other's business, right? We're supposed to hold each other accountable. There's 50-something commands we're given in the Bible that you can only do. It says, do this to one another, do this for one another. And we can only do that if we're a family, community, kind of up in each other's business. And that's the only way we can hold each other accountable. So whenever we start to fall into false doctrine, our brothers and sisters can come alongside and say, hold on, back up, let's re-examine this. And
so I'm going to come at this from the perspective of both psychology and a theology of language, because, and it's probably something that no one's going to disagree on, language changes over time. So for instance, if you take out a 1611 version of the King James Bible, it talks about unicorns, right? Well, we all know unicorns aren't real, so why does it say there's unicorns in the Bible? Well, it's because it was referring to a one-horned rhinoceros, right? One corn, okay? Language changes. C.S. Lewis uses the example in Mere Christianity about a gentleman. Gentleman used to mean that you were a landowner, right? Now we take it as being like a kind, nice male, right? So words change meaning. And so if we look at something like yoga, right, what is that really, and what is that person referring to? And then trying to take it on the grounds of what does that person mean versus what baggage does this term carry along with it. And so if the person's talking about doing a stretching routine with a group of friends, probably not bad. But if they're talking about doing some stretching routine where they're praying to some foreign deities of some sort, even if they don't understand they're praying, probably not a good idea. And so being aware of that, because so the psychological side of things, if we look at personality, there's typically recognized as 5 different traits. One of those is agreeableness. So how agreeable you are to other people. So a lot of people within the church are agreeable. So they're willing to accept, your pastor says this or your friend says that, whatever, you accept that and say, okay, it's wrong. And now that becomes true for you because someone you trust says it. Well, other people aren't so agreeable, and so they're going to say, well, what's wrong about it? I'm just stretching, right? So they're going to have a different conception, and so you're going to talk past each other because, again, it comes down to using words different. They're looking at what is this thing actually, not how am I using a specific term, whereas one person might be saying, well, no, my so-and-so said this thing with this term is wrong. And so you end up talking past each other without knowing it. So I'm going to tie that into, I think, a common a big thing we see now within the church that's growing and is being huge is the Enneagram. It's this new age-ish kind of personality test. And so a lot of people are going to denounce it and say, oh, that comes from New Age roots and it's bad. It's like, well, as a bunch of apologists up here, I think we're going to say, well, that's called the genetic fallacy. It doesn't matter where something came from, right? Because a broken clock can be right twice a day, right? So where something came, maybe it's possible that someone outside of Christianity stumbled on something about human nature that's true. And they have done that in many ways, and we shouldn't be afraid to affirm that. And so you have some people saying, well, don't use the Enneagram because it's New Age and it's wrong and it's got occult backgrounds. And then the other people saying, well, so what? It's effective. It taught me so much and it's great and it's helped me. And so then they talk past each other. Well, this is, again, so where I'm going to come at it as a scientist who studies personality. I say, well, let's just put it up to the test. Does it accurately explain human personality? And so I'm going to test that and say, okay, well, look, no, it doesn't. Right? It gets some people right, but it gets a lot of people wrong as well. And so it's not accurate, it's not reliable. So I'm not concerned about the roots, I'm concerned about the outcome, right? And so with the Enneagram, I'm going to say, well, the outcome is bad, it's not reliable, doesn't accurately or truthfully tell you about a person, about yourself, or about another person, although getting you to think more about who you are might be effective, but the tool itself is not. Whereas I'm going to look at, say, yoga or meditation and look at that. I don't care about the background, what's the effect, and if done in certain ways or done right without that baggage part of it, there may be good side effects for that. So having a daily stretching routine, or maybe specifically a stretching routine with a group of friends, might be really good for both your mental and your physical health. So I think we have to be careful to make sure we're drawing those distinctions between or really in how language is used and how a person is using a term versus how we might think they're using a term, or how we use other people, how we think other people are using a term. Because again, a lot comes down to language. I guess if I mean, maybe. So think of it maybe in a different situation. If a New Age doctor developed Tylenol, would you use it? Right. I'm thinking, like, most of us would say, oh, yeah, I mean, it works, right? Maybe he bases religion on it, right? And say, oh, I've created this new pain-killing drug, and this is a big thing for our religion. And but there's nothing necessarily wrong with that thing. It just happened to be because he has bad beliefs doesn't mean he developed something that's wrong or false or can't be used. So it comes down to that language, right? So you say, well, Tylenol, he's calling it his thing within an occultic kind of situation, a New Age thing. He has different purposes from it, but in reality, it's this drug with a certain chemical compound that has a certain effect within our body. So I would tend to view yoga or all these different things as kind of as a medicine. And I would say, well, is it or is it not effective, and for what? And regardless of where it came from. And I know there's a lot of disagreement. There's probably disagreement here on it. And again, that's something where I'm going to say that's okay. But what's important for me, from a Christian perspective, is are people thinking through it carefully? Because, again, we all have wrong beliefs. Every one of us, if you put us in a room and throw, the gamut of doctrine. So for my MDiv orals, we had to write like a 20-page paper on, doctrine of salvation, of creation, of humanity. So all these kind of 9 major doctrines, right? If you did that with all of us here, we disagree on points. But what I would want to know, and what they're testing us when we do those orals, is are we thinking through them carefully, and is our intent, what we're trying to do, is it to try to please God? Because that's, ideally, we want our intent and our actions to both be right. But sometimes we're going to get the actions wrong. And again, having that humility to recognize that, and always, always, always trying to do the right thing. And then if and when we fail, to admit to that and fess up to it. And so that's one of those things where I'm going to say, yeah, maybe there's disagreement and we might counsel people a different way, but I'm going to come from that perspective of let's separate what the thing actually is versus what a specific person or group might claim that it is, if that makes sense.
And I'll say, just kind of adding on to that, I think there's a big difference between being aware and being fearful. One of the things that I have to remind myself of all the time is what Jesus told us. And he said, no matter what happens, the gates of hell will not overcome his church. I mean, it won't. And if we believe that, and that's true, then anything that may infiltrate or creep in will ultimately die the death of 1,000 qualifications, because Jesus' church will not be defeated. It cannot be defeated. It will stand forever. And so one of the things that I have to remind parents, I work with teenagers, so one of the things that I have to remind parents of teenagers is don't overreact. Like, there are just moments when you just have to not overreact, and it's super hard. And there are moments when overreaction probably is appropriate, but there are other moments when overreaction just makes something worse. And so the difference between being aware of what's going on and the difference between being fearful of what's going on are two different things, especially in regards to the church. And so I think it is important for us to be aware of our culture, be aware of what's going on, be aware of what's being taught, be aware of these things, but also not to be fearful and go, oh my gosh, this is fixing to come in and crash. I had literally, this is years ago, I had a parent, and if they're watching, so sorry, but I had a parent come to me and ask if they should take their child out of school for 2 days because they were teaching evolution and biology. I mean, should I extricate my child from her school so that she doesn't hear this information as a sophomore in high school? And my response was, well, do you not think she's already heard it or not going to hear it? Like, so the best thing that we can do as parents, or just as human beings in general in the church, as the body of believers, is to shore ourselves up, which is the whole point of apologetics. Know what you believe and why you believe it. And I'm convinced that if you know those two things, there's nothing to fear. I mean, there's nothing new. I mean, we see this in the Bible. There's nothing new under the sun. We're not being taught anything new or groundbreaking that hadn't already been taught. And so we have to remind ourselves and preach to ourselves that Jesus has already overcome. We remind ourselves of John 16:33, in this world you will have trouble. Take heart, I've overcome the world. And we believe that. We believe, yeah, he has won. He's already overcome, and nothing is going to defeat his church. And I think that, for me, is where I get so much more encouragement in knowing the culture and being aware of the culture, but not fearful of the culture. And I think that's where I would draw that distinction.